Hi, I'm Daniel Strada. This is Engineering Ethics at NJIT. It's February 28th. This is the Hangout for Lesson 7. We're in Week 7, Lesson 7. Let me go and jump into the Moodle. Here we are. Okay, so we're in Lesson 7. This week we're doing the ethical codes. That means we're looking at the NSP Code of Ethics. I'm also asking you to look at the Board of Ethical Review. So if you go onto the website, there's this Board of Ethical Review. Sorry, yeah, so there's this Board of Ethical Review. The Board of Ethical Review does case interpretation. So they have lots of case studies from going back all the way to the 1950s. So your assignment this week is to look at one of these case studies. A typical case study will have some hypothetical case that it describes, and then it'll talk about the particular sections of the Code of Ethics that bear on the case, and it'll give some discussion, mostly comparing it to other cases that the Board of Review has looked at. So your assignment this week is to look at one of these cases, describe the case in your own words, give it an analysis. Do you think the Code of Ethics apply? Do you think the decision that the Board of Review, Ethical Review came to, do you think the decision was fair? What would you do in a similar situation? These kinds of questions.
Professor, is the Deepwater Horizon case in this website? Or like, is that permissible, or is that not one of the cases that we can go over for this week?
Yeah, good question. So we will do the Deepwater Horizon case as a case study next week. So next week is Lesson 8. Lesson 8 is entirely devoted to the Deepwater Horizon oil spill.
Okay.
So I'll give a whole lecture on this. So this will be one of the official case studies that we'll do as a class. So Lesson 8 is a case study of the Deepwater Horizon oil spill. Lesson 9 is a case study more generally on climate change, and then we'll talk about geoengineering as a particular ethical challenge. But then in Lesson 10, and I'm glad you brought this up during your own case studies, in Lesson 10 you will be asked to find your own case to do research on. You can't do Deepwater Horizon or the Challenger case, or the Pinto, because we've done those in class. But any other case of ethical significance to engineering ethics, you might do another major disaster like the Chernobyl's a very common one, 3 Mile Island, Hurricane Katrina. If you want to do the Dakota Access Pipeline and the protests and all the engineering challenges involved there, that would also be fine. Some kind of big environmental disaster or human tragedy is sort of typical stuff for these research projects. But you can also do something that's not about the cost of human life. You can do something like the RSA backdoor or the Diffie-Hellman crack, other security leaks. There's been a lot of hacking, major hacking going on recently. The Internet of Things is a very insecure network, technological network. So there's lots of examples like this that you might consider, other kinds of whistleblowers, and so on.
Professor, a quick question. So for this week, we have the extra credit assignment. I already posted mine on the specific link at the top of the Moodle forum. Yeah. And we have to, so we can comment on other people's assignments just, as if it was a regular post, right, for more extra credit.
So I believe I let you have one or two comments.
Hello.
The way that it'll work is that it won't show up on that week's Moodle assignment. It'll show up as extra credit. So as long as you're keeping track of where those comments are going, yeah. Yeah, you can leave comments in the extra credit. That's right.
Oh my God. Do you have your headphones? Can I borrow them real quick? Thank you. So no. Because my fucking headphones are always doing this shit.
Here, Brian, I'm going to go ahead and mute you until you fix the headphone situation. Okay. Yeah. So in weeks 10 and 11, you will do your own case study. Where you're coming. Yeah.
I'm sorry. My headset cut out when you were talking. Can you just repeat that really quickly, please?
Yeah. So you can submit comments in the extra credit, you will get some extra credit points for that. But those extra credit points and those comments won't count for your weekly reply grade.
Yeah.
So that's a separate grade. So as long as you're aware that those are separate grades, then yeah, you will get some extra credit for posting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then we also have the regular weekly posts. And then we have another extra credit for week 11, which is just just submit in the same place, right?
That's right. It'll be a documentary that I'll have you watch.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
The other thing I just wanted to say with regard to Brian's question, you will have time to do your own case study, to do your own research in weeks 10 and 11. In fact, you're required to do your own research for those weeks. It'll be the same case for both weeks. So you only have to do one case, but you will be required to do your own scholarly research for lessons 10 and 11. In lesson 10, you'll do like a fact-finding mission about the case, and then in lesson 11, you'll give your ethical analysis. These posts will be a little bit longer than normal week posts. So you'll be required to do a little more work for these weeks. You might want to start thinking about what you want to research now. But for this week, we're right now in week 7. So that'll happen when we get to weeks 10 and 11. Right now in week 7, your assignment is to look at the particular case studies of the NSP Board of Ethical Review. So in other words, I don't want you to pick your own case. I want you to look at the specific cases that have been given review by the Board of Ethical Review. So click on that link, this link right here. Go to this website. It doesn't have to be from the last year. It can be from any of the previous years. I will say that there were major legal changes to the Code of Ethics in 1978. So after 1978, the cases are different from the cases before. In 1978, the US sued the NSPE under the antitrust laws. Because it was formerly the position of the NSPE that it was unethical to bid on contracts. So if you were bidding against another engineer, it was considered against the norms of the profession that you were harming another engineer by underbidding them. And so the NSPE used to have the policy that bidding on contracts was against the ethical code. And in the 1970s, the United States sued the NSPE, saying that it created a trust and that the engineers had created a trust and that it was costing taxpayers too much money. And this was after Spiro Agnew had been fired from vice president for these no-bid contracts. And so the government wanted, in interest of fairness, it wanted to be able to open up bidding on contracts. And so it sued the NSPE to change its policy so that now bidding on contracts is not unethical. It's not required, but it's not unethical. So that change happened in 1978. And that means that the rules before 1978 are a little bit different. There's a lot of discussion about no-bid contracts back before the 70s. And then afterwards, the rules changed a little bit. So I would encourage you to do something after 1978. But anything in the 80s, 90s, or in the last 15 years, pick any of these cases and then describe it in your own words. So that's your assignment for this week. I have some questions for you to answer. Again, it's not a free writing assignment. For most weeks, you can write on whatever topic you want. But for this week, you're required to pick one of these Board of Ethical Review cases and give a full analysis. I have the lecture up online. In the lecture, I mostly go over the Code of Ethics itself. I don't cover everything, but I talk about what I can in an hour, and I talk about a lot of the specifics of the Code of Ethics. This may or may not interest you, especially if you aren't planning on becoming an engineer or a member of the NSPE. You might have your own Code of Ethics to deal with, your own ethical situations to deal with that are unique to your domain. And that's what the extra credit assignment is for this week. So I talk about this a little bit in the lecture, but this week there's also the extra credit assignments. The first assignment is due on the 10th. You can turn in after the 10th, but you only get 15 instead of 20 points. So the assignment here is to do some research. This will require some outside research where you look at the ethics of your field, right? So not just what the NSPE said. I mean, if you're going to be a member of the NSPE, then you can think about engineering ethics more specifically. But if you're not going to be a member of the NSPE, if you don't plan on doing that in your career, then think about the ethics specific to your particular field. And then write up a little essay, a normal length post, where you talk about the particular ethical challenges of your field. how they might differ from the engineering ethics that we've talked about generally. I think that's all the housekeeping stuff I wanted to say. Let me open it up, see if there's any questions. There were some things I wanted to say about the doctrine of the mean that I missed from last week that I wanted to talk about, and that's really all I wanted to say today. Let me first see if there are any questions or comments. Go ahead and interrupt or leave your questions in the chat if you have them. I guess one other thing to say, so lesson 7 is a little bit weird where you have to do this case analysis. The quiz this week will also involve another case analysis. This time it's the BART case, which is discussed in section 6.5 of your book. And the assignment this week will be similar to the Edgerton assignment from lesson 5, where I give you a case and you have to give it an analysis. No right or wrong answers, it's just, do you do a decent job considering the case? This is all supposed to prepare us a little bit for our lesson 11 assignment, where you're giving an analysis of the case that you do research on yourself. Right, so the idea is that we have a couple of these quizzes where we do some extended analysis of these cases on our own, and then in weeks 10 and 11, you do your research on your own case and you present your own analysis on a case that the rest of the class hasn't considered. So in some sense, those lessons are supposed to be about educating your peers, or peer education, educating fellow students in the class on this case study that we don't ourselves go over. All right, well, if there's no questions, I'm going to go ahead and if there's no questions, I want to go ahead and jump into the one thing I wanted to say from this week. So lesson 7 is a little bit of a dry week. You're just doing these case studies, and the lecture is really just going in detail through the ethical code. And sometimes that can be a little bit dry. We can talk about that more next week after you've worked through the lesson. The thing I want to do this today from last week, because you have your replies due tonight, is I wanted to say one thing about the doctrine of the mean. So a lot of students, I think, responded well. From what I read from the assignments that I've graded so far, it seemed that students responded fairly well to the idea of the doctrine of the mean, and seemed to understand pretty well how this theory was different from consequentialists and the deontologists. Right? It's character-based. It's a lot older of a view. Remember, the doctrine of the mean says that the virtuous position is the middle position between extremes. Right? There's extremes of excess on one hand, extremes of deficiency on the other, and that the ethical thing to do is in the middle, is the moderate view between the extremes. I called it last time the Goldilocks view of ethics. Right? There's the too hot porridge that's too hot, there's porridge that's too cold, and then there's a porridge that's just right in between. Okay, so I think this is somewhat intuitive. The theory has been around for a very long time, deeply embedded in cultures all over the world. So it's sort of a common view, and you should maybe recognize it as somewhat familiar. The thing I want to do is call it into question. I want to maybe try to start a discussion about whether, in fact, the middle is always the correct view. So Aristotle thinks that the moderate way is the virtuous way, right? What is the best way? You know what the best way is by finding the middle position between the extremes. Right, so the moderate view is always the best view, is what Aristotle thinks. Right, so this is the doctrine of the mean. So I want to call this into question. Is it possible that the extremes can be the better view? Is extremism ever a better view? Maybe that's a better way of putting it. Is it always the case that the moderate view is the best view, or can the extreme views ever be the better view? I think there's there's a sort of anti-extremism in the culture that people are wary of extremists. There's a sort of urge against extremism, especially in politics, where extremism can be very disruptive. It can be even deadly. So there's this move away from extremism. And my question is this always the right move? So the first thing I want to say, just to try to broach this question, is to notice that what the doctrine of the mean is giving is not a rule-based theory, but I want to say it's a dynamical theory. It's sort of a balancing theory, where what you're trying to do is not achieve, follow the right rule or achieve, more happiness than not, whatever, to satisfy some equation. But instead, what the doctrine of the mean is trying to do is trying to balance both sides, right? So, sorry, I've been having an allergy attack all day. So the example, I think I might have mentioned this in one of the lectures, but an example would be like drinking. So you might think that drinking is you can expect some religions have a prohibition against drinking, or sometimes the law has a prohibition against drinking. Right, those laws are strict. You either can drink or you can't drink. In Aristotle's view, he's not going to have a rule that says drinking is good or drinking is bad. He's going to say that there's an appropriate sort of middle amount of drinking that's okay. Right? And if you drink too much, that's bad. If you drink too little, that's also bad. But drinking the right amount, right? Having a glass of wine with dinner, doctors say that that's good for you. And that's the kind of thing that Aristotle would endorse, right? Drinking a glass of wine with dinner isn't too much drinking, but it's also not too little drinking. It's sort of the appropriate amount of drinking. Right, so this view is intuitive for this way, this sort of balancing between the extremes. I want to say that there's something deeply rooted in our psychology that inclines us to find these middle grounds. That part of what we do when we form our opinions, not just political opinions, but any opinion, part of what we do when we form opinions is try to balance out all the views that we're exposed to. So imagine someone has a strong opinion about a movie. They really liked Moonlight. Moonlight won the Oscar. Imagine someone saying that they really, really like Moonlight. And in fact, you're hearing lots of people say that they really like Moonlight. Right. The idea is that if you hear lots of people saying that you like Moonlight, then your opinion is more likely to go in that direction. And you're more likely to like Moonlight as well. Right. If all your friends are saying that they like the film, then it's more likely that you say you like the film also. And if all your friends are saying that they don't like the film, then it's more likely that you say that you don't like the film as well. And in general, what you're trying to do is balance out all the views of the people around you. This is how opinion dynamics work. It's just trying to find the middle ground of all the opinions. And because you're trying to find the middle ground of all the opinions, maybe it's not the case that expressing a middle view is always the most helpful way of doing that. So imagine you're trying to decide if you want to see Moonlight. And there's some people who say they really like the movie, and there's some people who say they really don't like the movie. And you're wondering if you should see the movie. And then you ask your friend, and your friend says, it was okay. I have a middle position about it. I don't like it too much. I don't like it too little. I like it just the appropriate amount. Well, part of the problem is that doesn't help you decide whether you should see the movie. Right? If someone expresses a completely middle position, that doesn't inform you one way or the other. Right? What informs you one way or the other is someone expressing extreme position. If one of your friends just can't stop raving about how great the movie is, that's going to have a stronger influence on you than someone who says, who has a moderate position, sort of not a strong position. Right. The point here is that extreme views change the balance of the discourse one way or the other, and having a moderate view is sort of neutral on the discourse. It doesn't change it one way or the other. And in some cases you don't want the discussion to change, but sometimes you do want the discussion to change. And in the cases where you do want the discussion to change, sometimes having a more extreme view can help. So the example I want to use is the public opinion on gay marriage. I didn't have the image. Let me find it. Yeah, here we go. Yeah, so this is a Gallup poll. Do you think marriages between same-sex couples should be recognized by the law as valid or not? So this is polling from back in the mid-90s, 1996, up to 2014. And in this time period, the Supreme Court decided that gay marriage is legal all across the country. 20 years ago, in the mid-90s, the public opinion was against gay marriage quite strongly, 68%, almost 70% against gay marriage, and only 30% for gay marriage. And what you saw over the last 20 years is this position shift to almost the opposite. This is actually, it's not the most recent. If I get a more recent one, the ends keep going even further apart. So if you remember, if you were politically conscious during this time, you might remember that the sides of the debate, on the one side there was the pro-gay marriage, and on the other side there was the anti-gay marriage view. And if you remember the debate, there was also a middle position. The middle position was the civil unions position, right? So some people argued that traditional marriage should stay between members of the opposite sex, but that there should be a civil alternative, sort of a government alternative that would allow same-sex marriages, and they would have most of the same rights as people who were married, but it just wouldn't be called marriage, right? So this is supposed to be the middle ground. It was supposed to be sort of the middle ground between the two extremes. The idea was that, well, we don't want to insult the people who think that marriage should be only between heterosexual couples. So we don't want to insult that institution. But we also want to give the rights to to gay couples, right? So how do you balance that out? Well, the civil unions are supposed to strike a balance on both sides. And it turns out the civil unions position didn't win, right? The pro-gay marriage side won, right? So now marriage is just marriage. There's no second, there's no sort of second-tier status of marriage. So lots of people had that moderate position. Hillary Clinton had the moderate position for a while. A lot of the politicians at the time, a lot of the moderate politicians at the time had this civil unions position as the moderate position. But it wasn't the moderate position that eventually won out. What won out was one of the extreme positions. And you might think that it's good that one of the extreme positions won out. You might think that it's better that we have marriage equality than we have a sort of separate and not equal sort of marriage system. In this kind of situation, you might think that it's better that the extremists on one side won, that they were more convincing than the moderate position. I'm not arguing that extremism is always good, but I'm arguing that in some cases the moderate position isn't the good position, and that sometimes it's better to move to one extreme or the other. I think the gay marriage case is a pretty clear case where the moderate position wasn't a stable position, and that you needed to be on one side or the other of this debate. And it was good, at least for the moment, that the right side won out, at least on my view. So that was my argument, that sometimes the moderate position is not the best position. Sometimes the extremist positions can be better. The reason I make this argument, to bring it back to engineering ethics, is for these whistleblowing cases, right? So whistleblowing can be an extreme action, right? Going to a newspaper, having a big story come out and having it be a big scandal, right? That can be an extreme action. It might cost you your job, right? These kind of cases look extreme, and if you think that the moderate position is always the right position, then you might go against these extremes simply because they're extreme. And so part of what I want to say is that sometimes the extreme position might be the right position, right? Maybe because there are extreme circumstances. Right? If the Senate is lying about $2 billion of taxpayer money going into this plane, or if the contractors are lying about this to the Senate, maybe that requires some extreme action. Right? $2 billion being stolen from taxpayers is also is an extreme circumstance that might demand an extreme reaction. So that was my attempt to make the argument that sometimes virtue ethics isn't the right position. I don't know if any of that registered, if anyone's paying attention. I guess everyone's just waiting for the word of the day. The word of the day is going to be extreme. I'll put it in the chat, just the word extreme. I don't have it on the quiz right now, but you can take the quiz and I'll regrade it when I put that word in. So the word of the day one more time is extreme. You can see it in the quiz. And people started logging off already. That's great. I guess I'm going to go ahead and end class right now. If no one has any questions, the only other thing to talk about right now is the code of ethics, and I talk about that in some detail in the lecture for this week. So I'll go ahead and let you off the hook and to go watch the video lectures. If there's any other questions, I'll take them now. Yes, Smith, that's the Hangout word. Your quiz will fail right now because I haven't put the word in as the correct answer, but I should be able to regrade the quiz in just a second. If no one has any questions, I'm going to go ahead and stop the video. I'll stay on the Hangout though if you want to ask questions off air. All right, thanks everyone. See you next week.